Welcome, weary wanderer, to the shadows between worlds, where twilight reigns eternal and the boundaries between light and darkness blur like watercolors in morning mist. Tonight, we shall explore the mysterious realm that exists as Hyrule's own reflection, a world born not of malice but of divine necessity, where ancient secrets slumber in perpetual dusk. This is the story of the Twilight realm, a tale of exile and redemption, of shadow and light dancing together in eternal balance. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and allow your mind to drift into the gentle twilight that connects all worlds. There's no hurry here, no need to grasp every detail. Simply let the story wash over you, like the softest evening breeze. In the beginning, when chaos gave way to divine order, and the very foundations of existence were laid by hands that moved with the patience of eternity itself, there existed a time before time, a moment suspended between nothingness and everything, when the three golden goddesses looked upon the swirling void and saw within it the potential for something beautiful beyond mortal comprehension. Din, the goddess of power, stepped forth first from the infinite expanse of possibility, her very presence causing the chaotic energies to take shape and form. With arms that could embrace mountains and breath that could kindle the hearts of stars, she sculpted the raw matter of creation into continents and oceans, valleys and peaks, giving physical substance to dreams that had existed only in the realm of divine imagination. Her work was the foundation upon which all life would flourish, the stable ground that would support countless generations of beings yet to be born. Nehru, the goddess of wisdom, followed with steps that rang like crystal chimes across the newly formed landscape, her mind encompassing all knowledge that ever was or ever could be. From her divine understanding flowed the laws that would govern this new world, the principles of cause and effect, the rhythms of time and season, the invisible threads that would weave together the tapestry of existence in patterns so complex and beautiful that mortal minds could spend lifetimes contemplating even their simplest expressions. Finally came Faror, the goddess of courage, her heart blazing with the fierce love that creates and protects life in all its myriad forms. She breathed into the ordered world that her sisters had shaped, and from that breath came forth every living thing, the soaring eagles and the humble flowers, the mighty dragons and the gentle deer, each creature perfectly suited to its place in the grand design that the three had envisioned together. When their work was complete, when the world hummed with the harmony of perfect creation, and life began to spread across the land, like dawn breaking over mountains, the three goddesses prepared to return to the heavens from whence they had come. Yet they did not depart empty-handed or leave their creation without guidance, for in the place where they had first touched the mortal realm, they left behind the most precious gift imaginable, the Triforce, that sacred relic, composed of three golden triangles that represented the very essence of the goddesses themselves, was placed at the heart of the land they had created with such love and care. This was not merely a symbol or token, but the actual crystallization of divine power, wisdom, and courage, the fundamental forces that had shaped reality itself, now made manifest in a form that could, theoretically, be touched and wielded by mortal hands. The land where this most sacred of all relics came to rest was known in the ancient tongue as Seichi, a word that carried within its syllables the weight of absolute holiness, the reverence due to a place where the divine and mortal realms had touched and become one. This was not simply sacred ground in the sense that mortals might understand the term, but something far more profound and fundamental, a place that existed at the very intersection of heaven and earth, where the breath of the goddesses still lingered in every breeze, and their footsteps could still be felt in every stone. This sacred land, this Seichi, was what would come to be known throughout all the ages that followed as the Kingdom of Hyrule. Yet, unlike the common understanding that might place the sacred realm as some distant dimension accessible only through mystical means, the truth was far more immediate and wondrous. Hyrule itself, in its entirety, was the sacred realm, the holy land where the Triforce rested and divine power flowed like invisible rivers through every meadow and forest. The people who came to dwell in this blessed realm understood, with an intuition that seemed to flow from the very soil beneath their feet, that they lived in a place unlike any other in all creation. Their devotion to the goddesses was not born of fear or obligation, but from the constant, gentle awareness of the divine presence that surrounded them like the air they breathed. Every sunrise over Hyrule Field was a reminder of Din's creative power. Every clear stream that flowed from the mountains carried echoes of Nehru's wisdom, and every act of kindness between neighbors reflected Farore's courage in bringing forth life and protecting it. The royal family that would eventually come to rule over this sacred land understood their role not as conquerors or overlords, but as guardians and stewards of something infinitely precious. The crown they wore was not a symbol of dominion, but of service, a reminder that they had been chosen to protect and preserve the holiness of the realm for all who would come after them. Their very bloodline carried within it a connection to the divine that manifested as sacred power, the ability to channel the goddess's will in times of great need. This understanding of Hyrule as the sacred land itself, rather than merely a kingdom that contained sacred places, was fundamental to everything that would follow in the realm's long and often troubled history. For if Hyrule was indeed the Seichi, the place where the divine had touched the mortal world most directly, then it naturally followed that it would attract not only reverence and protection, but also the attention of those who sought to claim divine power for themselves. The Triforce, resting at the heart of this sacred realm, was not hidden away in some distant dimension, but present always, its influence flowing through every corner of the kingdom, like underground springs that nourish the roots of mighty trees. The equal distribution of power that the goddesses had intended when they created the world was not merely a philosophical concept, but a living reality in Hyrule, where the divine essence touched all who dwelt within the kingdom's borders, regardless of their race, station, or origin. In those early ages, when the world was young and the memory of the goddess's presence was still fresh in the collective consciousness of all living things, this equal distribution of divine grace created a harmony that seemed too perfect to last. The Hylians, with their pointed ears that could hear the whispers of the gods, lived alongside the sturdy Gorons, who drew strength from the mountains themselves, while the graceful Zora flowed through the kingdom's waters like living embodiments of Nehru's wisdom. Each race and people brought their own gifts to the great symphony of existence that played out across the sacred land. The Gerudo, fierce and proud in their desert realm, contributed their warriors' courage and their deep understanding of survival in harsh places. The Kokiri, eternal children of the forest, maintained their connection to the natural world with an innocence that reflected Farore's pure love for all living things. Even the various monster tribes and creatures that dwelt in the wilder places of the kingdom were part of this grand design, each playing their role in the complex ecosystem that the goddesses had envisioned. The balance was delicate but perfect, maintained by the constant, gentle influence of the divine power that flowed through every stone and stream, every blade of grass and soaring bird. Yet perfection, as any student of history knows, carries within it the seeds of its own disruption. For while the goddesses in their infinite wisdom had created a world of perfect balance, and had distributed their power equally among all who dwelt therein. They had also given their creations something that would prove to be both the greatest gift and the most dangerous curse: free will. The ability to choose, to decide one's own path and determine one's own destiny, was perhaps the most precious aspect of the life that Furore had breathed into the world. Without it, all the perfect harmony and balance would have been merely an elaborate mechanism, beautiful but lifeless, like a music box that plays the same tune for eternity, without variation or growth. But free will, by its very nature, includes the freedom to choose wrongly, to desire what should not be desired, to reach for what should not be grasped. And in the early ages of Hyrule's history, when the sacred land basked in the golden light of divine favor, and all seemed destined to continue in perfect harmony for all eternity, there began to stir in the hearts of some a restlessness that would eventually reshape the very foundations of reality itself. The whispers began quietly, as such things always do, in the private thoughts and secret conversations of those who looked upon the equal distribution of divine grace and wondered why it should be so. Why should power be shared equally among all races and peoples? Why should the sacred Triforce, that ultimate source of divine authority, remain untouched and unclaimed when surely it had been left precisely so that worthy hands might take it up? These questions, innocent enough when first posed, carried within them a poison that would slowly spread through the collective consciousness of those who entertained them. For to question the wisdom of the goddesses in their equal distribution of power was to suggest that perhaps the divine plan was flawed, that perhaps mortal wisdom might improve upon what the creators of all existence had established. The sacred land of Hyrule, that Seichi, where the divine and mortal realms touched most closely, would soon discover that holiness and temptation are often separated by the thinnest of lines, and that the very power that makes a place sacred can also make it the target of those who would claim that sanctity for themselves. Yet in the hearts of mortals, shadows of desire began to stir like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon, barely visible at first, but carrying within them the potential for tempests that could reshape the entire landscape of existence. The equal distribution of divine power that had once seemed so perfect and natural began to feel, to some among the various peoples of Hyrule, like a limitation rather than a blessing. These were not outsiders or invaders who brought corruption from foreign lands, but rather individuals who had been born and raised within the sacred realm itself, who had grown up breathing the blessed air of Hyrule and drinking from streams that carried the essence of divine grace. They were, in every sense, children of the sacred land, which made their eventual fall from grace all the more tragic and profound. Among the diverse populations that called Hyrule home, there arose certain individuals who displayed an unusual aptitude for the mystical arts. These were not the gentle magics of healing and growing that were common throughout the kingdom, nor the elemental powers that the various races wielded in harmony with their natural environments. Instead, these individuals seemed drawn to more esoteric and powerful forms of magical practice, studies that delved deep into the fundamental forces that governed reality itself. At first, their pursuit seemed innocent enough, even admirable. Who would not wish to understand the deeper mysteries of existence? Who would not seek to comprehend the workings of the divine power that flowed through their homeland like invisible rivers? These magic users dedicated themselves to their studies with the same fervor that priests showed in their devotions, spending long hours in meditation and experimentation as they sought to unlock the secrets of creation itself. Their research took them into ancient texts and forgotten ruins, places where the earliest inhabitants of Hyrule had left records of their own attempts to understand the divine plan. They studied the movements of the stars and the changing of the seasons, the growth patterns of plants and the migration routes of animals, seeking always to find the underlying patterns that connected all things in the great tapestry of existence. As their knowledge grew and their abilities expanded, these magic users began to develop a sense of their own importance that went far beyond what their actual achievements merited. They had glimpsed the underlying structure of reality, had learned to manipulate forces that ordinary people could barely comprehend, and this knowledge began to separate them in their own minds from the common folk among whom they had been born. Where once they had seen themselves as part of the great community of Hyrule's people, all equally blessed by the goddess's grace, they now began to perceive themselves as somehow set apart, elevated by their magical abilities above those who possessed only mundane skills. The equal distribution of divine power that had once seemed natural and right began to feel like an oversight that needed to be corrected. Why should their vast knowledge and remarkable abilities be constrained by the same limitations that applied to simple farmers and merchants? Why should they content themselves with the same portion of divine grace that was granted to those who could not even perceive the deeper mysteries they had spent their lives studying? Surely the goddesses, in their infinite wisdom, had never intended for such obvious inequality of understanding to be matched by an enforced equality of power. These thoughts, once entertained, proved remarkably fertile and persistent, growing stronger with each passing day and each new magical discovery. The magic users began to gather together, forming small circles and societies where they could discuss their theories without fear of being overheard by those they increasingly saw as their intellectual inferiors. In these private gatherings, their conversations gradually shifted from scholarly discussions of magical theory to more pointed questions about the nature of power and authority in the sacred land. If they possessed abilities that far exceeded those of ordinary people, did they not have a responsibility to use those abilities for the greater good? And if they were to accept such responsibility, should they not also have the authority necessary to fulfill it effectively? The logic seemed unassailable to those who accepted its initial premises. They were the most knowledgeable, the most capable, the most qualified to make decisions that would affect the welfare of all who dwelt in Hyrule. The equal distribution of power that the goddesses had established might have made sense in the early days of creation, when all beings were equally ignorant of the deeper mysteries, but surely it was time for a more sophisticated approach to governance. The Triforce itself, that ultimate repository of divine power resting at the heart of the sacred land, became the focus of their increasingly ambitious plans. Here was the source from which all other power flowed, the wellspring of the divine grace that sustained all life in Hyrule. If they could claim the Triforce for themselves, they reasoned, they would have the authority and the ability to remake the kingdom according to more rational principles. No longer would power be distributed equally among all peoples, regardless of their merit or understanding. Instead, it would be concentrated in the hands of those best equipped to wield it wisely, namely, themselves. The chaos and inefficiency of democratic distribution would be replaced by the elegant order of rule by the most qualified, and all of Hyrule would benefit from their superior wisdom and magical abilities. These magic users began to see themselves not as rebels or usurpers, but as reformers, visionaries who understood the true potential of the sacred land better than anyone else, perhaps even better than the goddesses themselves had when they first established their supposedly perfect system. After all, the divine creators had returned to the heavens long ago, leaving their creation to develop and evolve without direct supervision. Surely they had expected their children to grow and mature, to take greater responsibility for their own governance as their understanding increased. The corruption of their thinking was subtle but profound, twisting noble impulses toward knowledge and responsibility into justifications for what was ultimately nothing more than a grab for power. They convinced themselves that their desire to rule over Hyrule was motivated by altruism and wisdom rather than by the simple human weakness of wanting more than they had been given. In the mystical visions that would later be granted to those who needed to understand these ancient events, these corrupted magic users were symbolically represented as three dark figures that bore a disturbing resemblance to Link himself, the eternal hero whose spirit would be reborn again and again to face the darkness that threatened the sacred land. The symbolism was both profound and heartbreaking, for it illustrated with perfect clarity how the corruption had transformed beings who had once belonged to the light into creatures of shadow and ambition. These were not monsters or demons who had invaded Hyrule from some external realm of darkness, but rather people who had been born in the sacred land itself, who had once been as pure and worthy as any hero, but who had allowed their hearts to be poisoned by the desire for more than what the divine plan had allocated to them. The three dark figures reaching toward the Triforce in the ancient vision represented not only the specific magic users who had led the rebellion so long ago, but also the eternal human tendency toward corruption, the shadow that lurks within every heart and waits for moments of weakness to emerge. They were what Link himself might have become if he had ever allowed his own great power to corrupt his humility and his sense of service to others. As their plans became more concrete and their organization more sophisticated, these fallen magic users began to gather followers from among others who had grown dissatisfied with the equal distribution of divine power. They found allies among ambitious nobles who chafed under the limitations of the existing order, among merchants who believed their wealth should grant them greater political influence, and among warriors who thought their martial skills deserved more recognition and reward. The movement grew slowly but steadily, spreading through the population of Hyrule like a subtle poison that weakened the bonds of community and mutual respect that had held the sacred land together for so long. Where once the various races and peoples had worked together in harmony, each contributing their unique gifts to the common good, now there began to appear divisions and hierarchies based on perceived merit and ability, rather than on the divine plan of equal grace for all. The conspiracy reached its ultimate expression when the magic users and their followers made the decision to act upon their convictions and attempt to seize the Triforce itself. This sacred relic, which had rested undisturbed at the heart of Hyrule since the departure of the goddesses, would become the prize in a struggle that would forever change the nature of the sacred land and create reverberations that would echo through all subsequent ages of history. Their campaign to claim the ultimate prize began not with open warfare, but with more subtle forms of manipulation and control. Using their magical abilities and political connections, they worked to undermine the existing structures of governance and authority, creating crises and conflicts that they could then offer to resolve through the application of their superior wisdom and power. Gradually, inexorably, they moved closer to their ultimate goal, positioning themselves to make a direct assault upon the resting place of the Triforce itself. They convinced themselves that when they finally claimed the sacred relic, when they held in their hands the very essence of divine power, all of Hyrule would see the wisdom of their cause and welcome the new order they would establish. The irony was that in their obsession with claiming the power to improve the sacred land, they had already begun to corrupt it simply through their intentions and their actions. The harmony that had once characterized Hyrule was fracturing under the pressure of their ambitions, and the equal distribution of divine grace was being replaced by a system based on competition and hierarchy, rather than cooperation and mutual support. The vision of three dark figures reaching toward the Triforce would become one of the most powerful and enduring symbols in all of Hyrule's long history, a reminder that the greatest threats to the sacred land often came not from external enemies, but from the corruption that could take root in the hearts of its own children. For in their desire to possess the ultimate power, these magic users had already begun to lose the very qualities that might have made them worthy to wield it. The goddesses, witnessing this betrayal of their gift of equal grace, felt something that transcended mortal understanding of sorrow and disappointment. A divine anguish that rippled through the very foundations of reality like the first crack in a perfect mirror. They had created the world with infinite love and care, had distributed their power equally among all beings as an expression of their boundless compassion, and had left the Triforce as a symbol of trust in the inherent goodness of their children. Now that trust had been broken by the very beings they had blessed most generously, those who dwelt in the sacred land itself, and who should have been the guardians and protectors of the divine gift, rather than its would-be usurpers. The magic users who reached for the Triforce, with hands stained by ambition and corrupted by the desire for dominion, represented not just a threat to the existing order, but a fundamental violation of the sacred covenant between the divine and mortal realms. Yet, even in their infinite wisdom, the goddesses understood that direct intervention in the affairs of mortals was a tool to be used only in the most extreme circumstances. They had given their children free will precisely because they wanted them to choose goodness and harmony of their own accord, not because they were forced to do so by divine compulsion. To step in too quickly or too harshly would be to negate the very gift of choice that made mortal existence meaningful and worthwhile. But when the corruption had advanced so far that it threatened not merely the political order of Hyrule but the very spiritual foundations upon which the sacred land rested, when the equal distribution of divine grace was in danger of being replaced by a system based on conquest and domination, the goddesses knew that they could no longer remain passive observers. The time had come for divine intervention, carried out through agents who could act in the mortal realm without violating the fundamental principle of free will. The light spirits, those ethereal beings who served as the direct representatives of divine will in the physical world, received the goddesses' command to restore balance to the sacred land before the corruption could spread beyond all hope of healing. These were not ordinary spirits but manifestations of the purest divine essence, beings of such concentrated holiness that their very presence could cleanse the darkest corruption and restore even the most twisted hearts to their original state of grace. Ordona, Farron, Eldin, and Lanayru, 4 names that would echo through the ages as symbols of divine justice tempered with mercy, of power wielded not for conquest, but for protection and restoration. Each light spirit embodied a different aspect of the goddess's will. Ordona carried the nurturing protection of Furore, watching over the simple farming communities where honest work and humble devotion created the foundation of civilized life. Faron embodied the wild courage that defends the natural world from those who would exploit or corrupt it. Eldin blazed with the creative fire of Din, the force that builds and shapes while burning away all that is false or weak. Lanayru flowed with the ancient wisdom of Nehru, the deep understanding that sees through deception and recognizes truth in all its forms. The light spirits descended from the divine realm with the measured inevitability of judgment itself, their arrival heralded not by trumpets or thunder, but by a subtle shift in the very quality of light that illuminated the sacred land. The air became cleaner and more transparent, revealing the corruption that had been hidden in shadows and forcing the magic users to confront the true nature of what they had become in their quest for greater power. Where the light spirits passed, the artificial divisions and hierarchies that the corrupted magic users had begun to establish simply dissolved, not through violence or coercion, but through the gentle restoration of the equal distribution of divine grace that the goddesses had originally intended. Those who had been seduced by promises of greater status and reward found their hearts cleared of the bitter ambition that had clouded their judgment, while those who had remained faithful to the original divine plan discovered their trust vindicated and their patience rewarded. The magic that the corrupted sorcerers had developed and refined over long years of study and experimentation proved utterly powerless against the light spirit's intervention. Spells that could level mountains and rituals that could bend the elements to their users will simply failed when confronted with the pure essence of divine authority. The elaborate theories and sophisticated techniques that had seemed to promise unlimited power were revealed as nothing more than clever manipulations of forces that the goddesses controlled absolutely and completely. One by one, the leaders of the rebellion found their abilities sealed away, not destroyed, but locked behind barriers that only genuine humility and repentance could ever hope to breach. The magical energies they had spent lifetimes learning to command were still present within them, but they could no longer access or direct those forces for purposes that contradicted the divine will of equal distribution and mutual cooperation. The sealing of their magic was not an act of cruelty or vengeance, but rather a form of divine mercy, a protection against their own corrupted impulses that prevented them from doing further harm to themselves and others. Like a parent taking a dangerous weapon away from a child who has proven unable to use it responsibly, the goddesses removed the sorcerer's ability to work magic, not to punish them, but to give them the opportunity to remember who they had been before power had corrupted their hearts. Yet even this merciful intervention could not address the fundamental problem that had led to the corruption in the first place. The magic users had been transformed by their exposure to greater power, and though their abilities were now sealed, the change in their essential nature remained. They could no longer be content with the simple, equal distribution of divine grace that satisfied others, for they had tasted something more and found it impossible to forget the flavor of dominion. Moreover, their very presence in the sacred land now posed a constant threat to the harmony that the goddesses wished to restore. Even without their magical abilities, their knowledge and their ambitions remained, and there was always the possibility that they might find new ways to pursue their goals, or corrupt others with their philosophies of inequality and hierarchy. The decision to banish the corrupted magic users from Hyrule was not made lightly or in anger, but with the same careful deliberation that had characterized all the goddesses' actions since the beginning of creation. They understood that exile from the sacred land would be a terrible punishment for beings who had been born and raised in the presence of constant divine grace. But they also recognized that it was the only way to preserve the spiritual integrity of the realm they had created with such love and care. The place of exile that the goddesses chose for the banished sorcerers was not some distant corner of the existing world, but an entirely new realm, created specifically to serve as their new home, and designed with the same care and attention to detail that had characterized the original creation of Hyrule itself. This was not a prison or a place of torment, but a reflection of the sacred land, a shadow world that would allow its inhabitants to develop and grow in ways that would not threaten the delicate balance of the realm of light. The shadow world, as it would come to be known in the ancient tongue of the Sheikah, was Hyrule's perfect complement, a realm of perpetual twilight, where the harsh extremes of blazing noon and absolute midnight were replaced by the gentle, soothing illumination of eternal dusk. Here, the banished magic users would have the opportunity to build a new civilization based on different principles, to explore the implications of their philosophical differences with the divine plan, without endangering those who had chosen to remain faithful to the original covenant. The creation of this shadow realm required an act of divine power that rivaled the original formation of Hyrule itself, for it was not simply a matter of shaping empty space into a habitable world, but of creating a reality that could exist in perfect parallel to the sacred land while remaining fundamentally separate from it. The Shadow World would share Hyrule's geography and climate, its mountains and rivers and forests, but all would be transformed by the gentle twilight that defined the realm's essential character. The goddesses understood that shadow cannot exist without light to cast it, and that the relationship between the two realms would be one of interdependence rather than opposition. The Shadow World would serve as a necessary complement to Hyrule, a place where different approaches to existence could be explored and developed without threatening the harmony of the sacred land. In their infinite wisdom, they recognized that even corruption and rebellion served purposes in the greater cosmic design, providing opportunities for growth and learning that would not otherwise be possible. The actual process of banishment was conducted with a gentleness that reflected the goddesses' continued love for their wayward children, even as they recognized the necessity of separation. The magic users were not torn violently from their homeland, but were instead guided through a transition that allowed them to maintain their dignity and their hope for eventual redemption. The Mirror of Twilight, that sacred artifact which would serve as the sole connection between the two realms, was created as both a gateway and a symbol of the relationship between light and shadow. Its surface reflected not the physical appearance of those who looked into it, but the true state of their hearts and souls, revealing whether they belonged in the world of light or had chosen the path that led to the realm of shadows. Through this mirror, the banished sorcerers passed from the sacred land they had tried to claim through force and ambition into the shadow realm, where they would have the opportunity to learn wisdom through experience and perhaps in time to understand the truth they had rejected in their quest for greater power. The crossing was not violent or traumatic, but rather like stepping from bright sunlight into the cool shade of a great tree, a transition that brought relief rather than suffering. Yet even this merciful exile carried with it a price that would weigh heavily on the hearts of the banished, for they were informed that their separation from the world of light was to be permanent. Unlike temporary punishment or corrective exile, this banishment would endure for as long as the shadow world itself existed, which was to say for all eternity, unless the fundamental nature of reality itself should change. The words of divine judgment that accompanied the banishment were both final and filled with an infinite sadness that reflected the goddess's sorrow at the necessity of separation from children. They continued to love despite their corruption. The banished were not permitted to return to the world of light, not because of divine cruelty, but because their very nature had been altered by their choices, and their presence in the sacred land would inevitably lead to renewed conflict and corruption. This permanent exile from the realm where they had been born and raised, where their ancestors had dwelt in harmony with the divine plan for countless generations, represented a loss so profound that it touched the very core of their being. They were not merely being separated from a place, but from a way of existence, from the constant presence of divine grace that had sustained and nourished them throughout their lives. The shadow world that awaited them was beautiful and peaceful, designed with the same care and love that had characterized the creation of Hyrule itself, but it could never fully replace what they had lost through their rebellion against the divine plan. The twilight that illuminated their new realm was gentle and soothing, but it was not the pure light of divine presence that had blessed the sacred land since the moment of creation. The banished magic users crossed through the Mirror of Twilight, carrying with them not only their sealed magical abilities and their corrupted philosophies, but also the seeds of a transformation that would reshape their very essence in ways they could not yet imagine. The shadow world would change them, just as their choices had already begun to change them. And what they would become in their new realm remained to be seen. The goddesses watched their departure with hearts full of sorrow, but also with hope that the separation might serve its intended purpose of allowing both realms to develop according to their own natures, without the constant threat of conflict and corruption. The sacred land of Hyrule would remain under the protection of divine grace and the equal distribution of power that had always been the foundation of its harmony. The shadow world would become something new and different, a realm where different principles might be explored, and where the banished might eventually find their own path to wisdom and understanding. The goddesses did not abandon their wayward children, but rather provided them with the opportunity to learn through experience what they had rejected through intellectual pride and ambition. The creation of the shadow world and the banishment of the corrupted magic users marked the end of Hyrule's age of innocence and the beginning of a more complex era in which the sacred land would need to remain constantly vigilant against the renewal of the corruption that had once threatened to destroy its very foundations. The equal distribution of divine grace would continue, but it would now exist alongside the knowledge that not all who received that grace would choose to use it wisely or well. The mirror of Twilight stood as a permanent reminder of the price of ambition and the consequences of rejecting the divine plan in favor of mortal desires for dominion and control. Through its reflective surface, future generations would be able to see the truth about their own hearts and understand the choice between light and shadow that faced every soul in every moment of existence. The light spirits returned to their eternal vigil, their intervention complete but their watchfulness undiminished, for they understood that the corruption which had led to the first great crisis might arise again in different forms and would require constant attention to prevent its spread. The divine agents remained ready to act whenever the balance between light and shadow was threatened by those who would seek to claim more than their rightful share of the goddess's infinite grace. In the aftermath of the banishment, the sacred land of Hyrule entered a new phase of its existence, one marked by greater wisdom about the nature of corruption and the price of ambition, but also by a deeper appreciation for the divine gift of equal distribution that the goddesses had provided from the very beginning. The harmony that had been threatened was restored, but it was now a harmony maintained through conscious choice rather than innocent ignorance of the alternatives. This realm of perpetual twilight was not a place of torment, as those dwelling in the world of light might have imagined, but something far more subtle and profounder dimension that existed in perfect harmony with its own unique nature, designed by the same divine hands that had shaped Hyrule itself, but according to principles that reflected the different path its inhabitants had chosen through their rebellion against the original order. The Shadow World, known in the ancient tongue as Kage no Seikai, possessed a beauty that was both alien and familiar to those who had once dwelt in the sacred land of light. Here, the harsh extremes of blazing noon and absolute midnight that characterized the mortal realm were replaced by an eternal twilight that cast everything in shades of silver and deep purple, creating an atmosphere of perpetual contemplation and quiet mystery. The landscape itself mirrored that of Hyrule in its basic geography. The same mountain ranges rose toward a sky that remained forever caught between day and night. The same rivers flowed through valleys that echoed with familiar, yet transformed melodies, and the same forests spread their branches in patterns that suggested memories of the sacred land without exactly duplicating its features. Yet everything was touched by the gentle, pervasive twilight that gave the realm its essential character and influenced all who dwelt within its boundaries. The quality of light in this shadow realm was unlike anything that existed in the world from which the banished sorcerers had come. It was not the absence of illumination, but rather a different form of radiance altogether, one that seemed to emanate from within objects themselves rather than falling upon them from external sources. Trees glowed with their own inner luminescence. Water reflected depths that seemed to contain stars that had never been seen in any earthly sky, and the very air shimmered with a phosphorescence that made breathing feel like drawing light directly into one's lungs. This ethereal illumination had an extraordinary effect upon consciousness itself. For those who lived within its gentle embrace found their thoughts becoming clearer and more focused, their emotions settling into deeper patterns of harmony and understanding. The twilight of the shadow world was not merely a physical phenomenon, but a spiritual influence that touched the very essence of those who dwelt beneath its eternal glow. The banished magic users who had crossed through the mirror of twilight, carrying with them the burden of their corrupted ambitions and sealed powers, soon discovered that their new realm would not permit them to remain unchanged. The twilight that surrounded them on all sides began almost immediately to work its transformative influence upon their hearts and minds, not through force or compulsion, but through a gentle, persistent invitation to remember who they had been before power had corrupted their original nature. The first change they noticed was in the quality of their thoughts themselves. The restless ambition that had driven them to seek dominion over the sacred land began to quiet and settle, not disappearing entirely, but losing its sharp edges and desperate urgency. The constant mental chatter of planning and scheming that had filled their minds during their rebellion gradually gave way to longer periods of contemplative silence, moments when they could simply exist without feeling the need to grasp for more than they possessed. This transformation was not accomplished through any external pressure or divine intervention beyond the creation of the realm itself, but rather through the natural influence of the shadow world's unique spiritual atmosphere. Just as certain climates encourage the growth of particular plants while discouraging others, the eternal twilight of their new home encouraged the development of certain mental and emotional qualities, while gently inhibiting those that had led to their corruption and exile. The sealed magical abilities that the light spirits had locked away within them remained inaccessible, but the banished sorcerers found that they no longer felt the burning desire to reclaim those powers that had once consumed their every waking moment. The twilight seemed to whisper to them that there were other forms of power, subtler but perhaps more meaningful, that might be developed in this place of eternal dusk and quiet contemplation. As the years passed, and the influence of the shadow world continued its gentle work upon their spirits, the former magic users began to undergo a transformation that was both physical and metaphysical, their very essence adapting to the unique conditions of their new realm. Their bodies, which had been shaped by lifetimes spent in the bright light and clear air of Hyrule, gradually adjusted to the different atmosphere and illumination of the shadow world. Their skin took on a pale, luminescent quality that seemed to echo the gentle phosphorescence of their surroundings, while their eyes grew larger and more sensitive, better adapted to perceiving the subtle gradations of light and shadow that characterized their new environment. Their movements became more fluid and graceful, as if the twilight had taught them to flow like water or drift like mist, rather than striding with the firm, determined steps of those who sought to conquer and control. But the most profound changes were those that occurred within their hearts and souls, transformations that touched the very core of their being and reshaped their understanding of themselves and their place in the cosmic order. The arrogance and ambition that had driven them to seek dominion over the sacred land gradually dissolved under the influence of the eternal twilight, replaced by a humility and acceptance that they had never known during their lives in the world of light. The shadow world seemed to possess an almost parental quality in its influence over its inhabitants, gently correcting their spiritual imbalances without harsh punishment or violent intervention. Those who had been consumed by the desire for power found themselves developing a deep appreciation for simplicity and contentment, while those who had been driven by intellectual pride discovered the peace that comes from acknowledging the limits of mortal understanding. The transformation was not uniform or instantaneous, for each individual brought their own unique combination of strengths and weaknesses to the process, and the shadow world responded to each according to their particular needs and circumstances. Some found their hearts softened quickly by the realm's gentle influence, while others required many years of exposure to the Twilight's patient ministrations before they began to experience significant change. Yet eventually, inevitably, all who dwelt within the shadow world found themselves becoming something new and different from what they had been in their previous existence. They retained their memories of the sacred land and their understanding of the events that had led to their exile, but these recollections no longer carried the sharp pain of loss or the bitter resentment of injustice that had initially accompanied their banishment. Instead, they began to develop a different perspective on their exile, seeing it not as punishment inflicted by a vengeful deity, but as an opportunity provided by infinite divine wisdom, a chance to explore aspects of existence that would never have been possible within the constraints of their original environment. The shadow world offered them the possibility of becoming something that had never existed before, beings who bridged the gap between light and shadow, who could understand both realms while belonging fully to neither. This gradual transformation of their essential nature was accompanied by equally profound changes in their social and cultural development. The hierarchical thinking that had characterized their rebellion against the equal distribution of divine power proved impossible to maintain in an environment that encouraged humility and mutual understanding rather than competition and dominance. The communities that formed within the shadow world were based on cooperation and shared contemplation, rather than the struggle for advancement and recognition that had marked their previous existence. Leadership roles emerged naturally from wisdom and compassion, rather than from political maneuvering or the accumulation of power, and decisions were made through consensus and patient discussion, rather than through the exercise of authority by those who claimed superior knowledge or ability. The descendants of the banished sorcerers, who had never known the world of light or experienced the corruption that had led to their ancestors' exile, were born into this transformed culture and grew up with hearts that had been shaped from birth by the gentle influence of the eternal twilight. These children of shadow possessed an innocence and purity that rivaled that of any being who had ever dwelt in the sacred land, for they had been raised in an environment that actively encouraged the development of virtuous qualities while discouraging those that led to corruption and conflict. These second and subsequent generations of Shadow World inhabitants came to be known as the Shadow Tribe, the Kage-zoku, a name that reflected both their origin in the realm of Twilight and their development into something unique and distinct from either their corrupted ancestors or the peoples who continued to dwell in the world of light. They were neither the ambitious sorcerers who had been banished for their rebellion nor ordinary mortals untouched by the deeper mysteries of existence, but something entirely new, beings whose very nature had been shaped by their realm's unique spiritual environment. The Shadow Tribe developed their own customs and traditions, their own forms of art and expression, their own ways of understanding the relationship between individual consciousness and the cosmic order. Their music was composed of harmonies that seemed to capture the essence of Twilight itself, while their visual arts played with subtle gradations of light and shadow that created effects impossible to achieve in any other environment. Their architecture reflected the flowing, organic qualities of their realm, with buildings that seemed to grow from the landscape itself, rather than being imposed upon it through force or artifice. The structures they created were marvels of integration with their environment, drawing their illumination from the natural phosphorescence of the shadow world while providing spaces that enhanced rather than interfered with the realm's contemplative atmosphere. The Shadow Tribe's relationship with their environment was one of complete harmony and mutual understanding, for they had been shaped by the same forces that governed the realm itself and shared its essential nature in ways that made conflict or exploitation impossible. They were not conquerors or manipulators of their surroundings, but partners in an eternal dance of existence that celebrated the unique beauty and wisdom of the shadow world. Their source of life and sustenance came not from the blazing sun that illuminated the world of light, but from a different kind of radiance altogether, the gentle luminescence that emanated from certain crystalline structures known as souls, which served the same function in their realm that the sun served in Hyrule, while possessing entirely different qualities and characteristics. The souls were not distant astronomical bodies, but rather terrestrial formations that had grown naturally within the shadow world's unique spiritual environment. Crystalline trees or pillars that gathered and concentrated the realm's ambient twilight into sources of nourishing radiance. These structures provided not only the physical light necessary for the Shadow Tribe's survival, but also the spiritual sustenance that their transformed nature required to maintain its essential characteristics. The light of the souls was fundamentally different from the solar radiance that sustained life in Hyrule, possessing qualities that were specifically attuned to the needs of beings who had been shaped by the shadow world's influence. Where the sun's light was harsh and direct, promoting rapid growth and intense activity, the light of the souls was gentle and indirect, encouraging slow development and deep contemplation. This difference in illumination reflected the broader contrast between the two realms and their respective approaches to existence. The world of light favored action and achievement, progress and expansion. The constant striving toward goals that lay beyond immediate reach. The shadow world emphasized being overdoing, understanding over accomplishment, the cultivation of inner wisdom rather than the accumulation of external success. The Shadow Tribe learned to live in harmony with these different rhythms and values, developing forms of existence that were perfectly adapted to their realm's unique characteristics. They did not measure success by the same standards that applied in the world of light, nor did they seek the same kinds of achievements or rewards that motivated those who dwelt under the sun's direct radiance. Instead, they found fulfillment in the deeper exploration of consciousness itself, in the patient development of wisdom and compassion, in the creation of beauty that served no purpose beyond its own existence. Their lives were marked by a serenity and contentment that had been impossible for their ancestors to achieve during their time in the sacred land, for they had learned to find satisfaction in what they possessed, rather than constantly yearning for more. The transformation of the banished sorcerers into the peaceful Shadow Tribe represented one of the most remarkable redemptive processes in the entire history of divine intervention in mortal affairs. Those who had been corrupted by their desire for dominion over the sacred land had been given the opportunity to discover forms of fulfillment that transcended their original ambitions, while their descendants had inherited a spiritual legacy that rivaled the holiness of any people who had ever dwelt in direct communion with divine grace. The shadow world itself served as a testament to the infinite creativity and compassion of the goddesses, who had refused to simply destroy or abandon their wayward children, but had instead created an entire realm where they could develop according to their transformed nature, while contributing their own unique gifts to the cosmic symphony of existence. In the gentle twilight of this realm of shadows, surrounded by the soft luminescence of the souls and breathing air that shimmered with its own inner light, the Shadow Tribe lived lives of quiet contemplation and deep harmony, their very existence serving as proof that even the most profound corruption could be transformed through patience, wisdom, and the persistent influence of divine love, expressed through the creation of environments that encouraged the development of virtue rather than vice. For ages uncounted, this balance remained undisturbed, a perfect equilibrium between the world of light and the realm of shadows that seemed destined to endure until the end of time itself. The shadow world continued in its state of peaceful twilight, where the descendants of the banished sorcerers had evolved into the gentle shadow tribe, their hearts purified by countless generations of exposure to their realm's transformative influence. The sacred land of Hyrule prospered under the equal distribution of divine grace, its people living in harmony with the goddess's original design, while remaining blissfully unaware of the parallel realm that existed as their world's perfect reflection. This period of cosmic harmony stretched across eons, unmarked by the conflicts and catastrophes that had characterized earlier ages, a testament to the wisdom of the divine solution that had separated the incompatible approaches to existence while allowing both to flourish according to their respective natures. The light spirits maintained their eternal vigil, watching over both realms with the patient dedication of shepherds tending flocks that grazed in different pastures but remained equally precious in the sight of their divine creators. Yet even the most carefully maintained equilibrium contains within itself the seeds of eventual change, and the cosmic balance that had seemed so stable and permanent carried within its very perfection the potential for disruption on a scale that would test the foundations of both worlds. The source of this disruption would come not from within either realm, but from an external force that respected neither the sanctity of the sacred land nor the peaceful twilight of the shadow world. Ganondorf, the man who would become the eternal enemy of all that was good and harmonious in existence, had been born in the desert kingdom of the Gerudo with gifts and qualities that should have made him a great leader and protector of his people. Possessed of intelligence that bordered on genius and charisma that could move hearts and minds with equal facility, he had risen to become king of the Gerudo through a combination of natural ability and ruthless ambition that had impressed even those who had reason to fear his growing power. But the same qualities that had elevated Ganondorf to the throne of his desert kingdom had also planted within his heart the seeds of a corruption that would eventually transform him into something far more terrible than any mortal tyrant. His intelligence, rather than leading him to wisdom, had convinced him that he alone possessed the vision necessary to reshape the world according to more rational and efficient principles. His charisma, instead of inspiring him to serve others, had become a tool for manipulating those around him to serve his increasingly grandiose ambitions. The divine gift of the Triforce of Power, which should have been used to protect and nurture his people, became instead the fuel for dreams of conquest that extended far beyond the borders of the Gerudo kingdom. Ganondorf looked upon the sacred land of Hyrule with its equal distribution of divine grace and saw not a model of cosmic harmony, but a system crying out for the firm guidance of a superior intellect who understood how power should truly be wielded. His first attempt to claim dominion over Hyrule had ended in failure and what should have been death, as the hero of time and the princess of Hyrule combined their legendary courage and divine wisdom to prevent his conquest of the sacred land. Yet Ganondorf's connection to the Triforce of Power had transformed him into something that transcended ordinary mortality, and even apparent death could not fully contain the malevolence that had taken root in his heart. When the sages of Hyrule gathered to execute the would-be conqueror for his crimes against the sacred land and its people, they discovered to their horror that their combined spiritual power was insufficient to destroy the evil that Ganondorf had become. The divine fragment he carried within himself had been so thoroughly corrupted by his malevolent will that it served as a shield against even the most sacred forms of justice, protecting him from the final punishment that his actions had more than earned. Faced with the impossibility of executing Ganondorf through conventional means, the sages were forced to seek an alternative solution that would remove him from the world of light, while acknowledging their inability to truly destroy him. The Mirror of Twilight, that ancient artifact which served as the sole gateway between Hyrule and the Shadow World, offered them a desperate option that seemed to address both their immediate need and their long-term concerns about containing such a dangerous enemy. The decision to banish Ganondorf to the Shadow World was not made lightly, or without full awareness of the potential consequences for the peaceful realm that would be forced to receive such an unwelcome visitor. The sages understood that they were essentially transferring their problem to another dimension, potentially disrupting the harmony that had existed in the Shadow World for countless ages. Yet their primary responsibility was to protect the sacred land of Hyrule, and they could see no other option that would effectively remove Ganondorf from their world while ensuring that he could never return to threaten their people again. The banishment itself was carried out with all the ceremonial gravity and spiritual power that the sages could muster. Their combined will focused on forcing Ganondorf's corrupted essence through the Mirror of Twilight into the realm of shadows that had never before been touched by such concentrated malevolence. The ancient artifact that had once served as a bridge between parallel worlds of equal dignity and worth now became an instrument of exile, a one-way passage that would deposit the greatest enemy of harmony and peace into a realm that had known neither for countless peaceful generations. Ganondorf's arrival in the Shadow World was like a meteor of pure malice crashing into a garden of contemplation and serenity, its impact sending shockwaves through the spiritual foundations of a realm that had been shaped by eons of gentle twilight and peaceful coexistence. The very air seemed to darken and thicken around his presence, while the soft phosphorescence that had illuminated the Shadow World since its creation flickered and dimmed as if recoiling from contact with something fundamentally opposed to its essential nature. The Shadow Tribe, whose hearts had been purified by generations of exposure to their realm's transformative influence, found themselves suddenly confronted with a form of evil they had no experience in recognizing or resisting. Their ancestors had been corrupted by ambition and the desire for power, but that corruption had been cleansed away by the gentle persistence of the eternal twilight. Ganondorf's malevolence was of an entirely different order, a corruption so profound and concentrated that it actively resisted any attempt at purification or redemption. The souls that had provided light and spiritual sustenance to the Shadow Tribe for countless ages began to dim and fade as Ganondorf's presence spread like a poison through their realm, his very existence seeming to absorb and corrupt the gentle radiance that had sustained their peaceful civilization. The crystalline structures that had grown naturally from the Shadow World's spiritual environment withered and cracked under the influence of malice that recognized no distinction between light and shadow, seeking only to consume and corrupt everything it encountered. Without the nourishing light of the souls, the Shadow Tribe found themselves undergoing a transformation as profound and terrible as their ancestors' original evolution, from corrupted sorcerers to peaceful shadow dwellers, had been beautiful and redemptive. The gentle hearts and pure spirits that had characterized their people for countless generations began to darken and twist under the influence of an evil that had never been meant to exist in their realm. The most visible sign of this corruption was the physical transformation that overtook the Shadow Tribe as Ganondorf's malice spread through their world like a plague of darkness. Their luminescent skin grew dark and mottled, while their large, sensitive eyes became hollow and filled with a malevolent glow that reflected the evil that was consuming their hearts. Their graceful, fluid movements became jerky and predatory, as if they were learning to stalk and hunt rather than flowing in harmony with their environment. But the physical changes were merely the outward manifestation of a much deeper spiritual corruption that was reshaping the very essence of the Shadow Tribe's being. The contemplative peace that had characterized their existence was replaced by a restless hunger for violence and domination, while their natural harmony with their environment was corrupted into a desire to control and exploit the Shadow World's resources for purposes that had never before occurred to their purified hearts. The transformation was not instantaneous or uniform, for the Shadow Tribe's generations of spiritual purification provided them with some resistance to Ganondorf's corrupting influence. Those individuals whose hearts were most firmly rooted in the peaceful ways of their ancestors managed to maintain their essential nature longer than others, though even they eventually succumbed to the overwhelming malevolence that was poisoning their entire realm. The process by which the gentle Shadow Tribe became the savage Shadow Beasts was one of the most tragic corruptions in the entire history of both worlds, representing the destruction of a civilization that had achieved a form of harmony and wisdom that rivaled anything ever accomplished in the sacred land itself. These beings, who had transcended their ancestors' corruption through patient spiritual development, were forced to watch helplessly as their hard-won peace and purity were stripped away by an evil that cared nothing for their achievements or their aspirations. Ganondorf observed this transformation with satisfaction rather than remorse, viewing the corruption of the Shadow Tribe not as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a resource to be exploited in his continuing quest for dominion over all existence. The Shadow Beasts, that had once been peaceful contemplatives, became his willing servants, their corrupted hearts now aligned with his malevolent purposes, and their transformed bodies perfectly suited to carrying out acts of violence and intimidation that he could not accomplish alone. The Shadow World itself began to change under the influence of Ganondorf's presence, its eternal twilight growing darker and more oppressive as the souls that had once provided gentle illumination were consumed by the spreading corruption. The flowing architecture that the Shadow Tribe had created in harmony with their environment became twisted and threatening, while the natural phosphorescence that had made breathing feel like drawing light into one's lungs was replaced by a suffocating atmosphere thick with malice and despair. Even Princess Zelda's trusted companion and guide, the Twilight Princess Midna, who had inherited the throne of the Shadow World through an ancient lineage that stretched back to the realm's earliest inhabitants, was not immune to the corruption that Ganondorf's presence had unleashed upon her domain. The evil that had transformed her people into shadow beasts reached out to claim her as well, stripping away her true form and reducing her to a cursed existence that reflected the diminished state of her entire realm. Midna's transformation from the beautiful and wise ruler of the Shadow World into a small, impish creature, barely capable of existing in either realm, represented perhaps the most personal and cruel aspect of Ganondorf's corruption of the Twilight dimension. She, who had been born to guide and protect her people, found herself helpless to resist the evil that was destroying everything she held dear. Her power and authority stripped away along with her physical form. The curse that bound Midna was particularly insidious because it not only changed her appearance, but also limited her ability to access the full range of her royal powers and wisdom. She remained conscious and aware of what was happening to her realm, but her capacity to act effectively against the corruption was severely constrained by the magical bindings that Ganondorf's malice had wrapped around her essence. This reduction of the Shadow World's rightful ruler to a state of powerless observation, while her realm was consumed by evil, represented one of Ganondorf's most calculated acts of cruelty, demonstrating his understanding that the most effective way to destroy a civilization was not simply to conquer it, but to corrupt it so thoroughly that it became unrecognizable to those who had once called it home. The shadow beasts that had once been the gentle Shadow Tribe now served as Ganondorf's army of corruption, ready to spread the same malevolence that had consumed their realm to any other dimension that might offer itself as a target for conquest. Their transformation from beings of peace and contemplation to creatures of violence and malice made them particularly effective instruments of evil, for they retained enough of their original intelligence and abilities to be formidable opponents, while being completely loyal to the dark power that had remade them in its own image. The corruption of the Shadow World represented more than just the fall of a single realm or civilization. It was an assault on the very principle of balance between light and shadow that had been established by the goddesses when they first created the parallel dimensions. The Shadow World had been intended to serve as a complement to the sacred land of Hyrule, a place where different approaches to existence could be explored without threatening the harmony of either realm. Ganondorf's presence had shattered this delicate equilibrium, transforming the realm of gentle twilight into a source of active malevolence that threatened not only its own inhabitants, but the entire cosmic order that depended on the proper relationship between light and shadow. The balance that had been maintained for countless ages was now in danger of being permanently destroyed, with consequences that could extend far beyond the boundaries of either world. The corruption that had consumed the Shadow World began to seep through the barriers between dimensions, carrying with it the potential to spread Ganondorf's malevolence back into the sacred land from which he had been banished. The very purpose of his exile to protect Hyrule from his corrupting influence was being undermined by his transformation of the Shadow World into a staging ground for renewed assault on the realm of light. This contamination of the dimensional barriers represented the beginning of a new phase in the eternal struggle between good and evil, one in which the traditional boundaries between light and shadow, sacred and corrupted, would be blurred beyond easy recognition. The clear distinctions that had once made it possible to separate incompatible forms of existence into parallel realms were being dissolved by a malevolence that recognized no limits and respected no boundaries. The tragic irony of the situation was not lost on those few beings in either realm who possessed sufficient wisdom to understand what was happening. The Shadow World, which had been created as a place of exile and redemption for those corrupted by their desire for power, had itself become corrupted by the very evil it was supposed to contain. The solution that had once promised to maintain the cosmic balance had become the source of its potential destruction. As Ganondorf consolidated his control over the corrupted Shadow World and began to plan his return to the realm of light, the stage was set for a conflict that would test not only the strength and courage of individual heroes, but the fundamental principles upon which both worlds had been established. The balance that had seemed so stable and permanent was revealed to be far more fragile than anyone had imagined, vulnerable to disruption by evil that was patient enough to work from within, rather than simply assaulting from without. Armed with borrowed evil, Zant brought false Twilight to Hyrule, wielding power that had been granted to him by the corrupted Lord, who now ruled over the Shadow World with absolute dominion and malevolent purpose. The self-proclaimed King of Shadows had emerged from the ranks of the transformed Shadow Tribe as one who possessed both the ambition to serve Ganondorf's will and the magical aptitude necessary to channel the dark power that his master was eager to share with a worthy servant. Zant's rise to prominence within the corrupted hierarchy of the Shadow World had been swift and brutal, his natural cunning and ruthless determination making him an ideal instrument for Ganondorf's plans of renewed conquest. Where the original Shadow Tribe had valued contemplation and harmony, Zant embodied the opposite qualities, a hunger for power that matched his master's own ambitions, and a willingness to employ any means necessary to achieve his goals, regardless of the cost to others or to the fundamental nature of reality itself. The transformation that had overtaken Zant during his exposure to Ganondorf's corrupting influence went beyond the physical changes that had affected the rest of the Shadow Tribe, for he had actively embraced the malevolence that others had simply been unable to resist. His heart, which might once have been capable of the same purification that had characterized his ancestors, was now so thoroughly aligned with evil that he served as a perfect conduit for the dark power that Ganondorf wished to project back into the world of light. The magic that Zant wielded was fundamentally different from any that had ever existed in either the Shadow World or the sacred land of Hyrule, for it drew its strength not from the natural forces that governed both realms, but from the concentrated malice that had corrupted the very foundations of the Twilight dimension. This borrowed power, as Princess Zelda would later describe it, was evil in its purest form, divorced from any connection to the divine plan or the natural order that the goddesses had established when they first created the parallel worlds. Unlike the shadow magic that had once been practiced by the peaceful inhabitants of the Twilight realm, gentle arts that worked in harmony with their environment's unique properties, Zant's corrupted abilities were designed to dominate and transform rather than to cooperate and enhance. His spells did not seek to understand or work with existing natural forces, but rather to override and replace them with artificial constructs that served his master's will without regard for the consequences to the affected parts, environments, or beings. The most insidious aspect of Zant's magical arsenal was his ability to create what appeared to be twilight, but was in reality something far more dangerous and destructive, a false twilight that bore no resemblance to the gentle, contemplative atmosphere of the true Shadow World, but instead served as a vehicle for spreading corruption and transformation throughout the realm of light. These shadow crystals, as they came to be known, represented perhaps the most sophisticated and terrible weapon in Ganondorf's campaign to reclaim dominion over the sacred land from which he had been banished. The shadow crystals were not natural formations that had grown from the spiritual environment of either realm, but rather artificial constructs created through the application of corrupted magical principles that violated the fundamental laws governing the relationship between light and shadow. Each crystal served as a focal point for absorbing and corrupting the natural light that sustained life in Hyrule, replacing that nourishing radiance with an artificial twilight that transformed rather than illuminated everything it touched. The creation of these crystals required Zant to channel Ganondorf's malevolent power through his own being, serving as a conduit for evil that was so concentrated and pure that exposure to it would have destroyed any ordinary person instantly. That Zant not only survived this process, but was able to direct and control such forces spoke to the depth of his corruption and his complete alignment with his master's will. For only someone who had utterly abandoned any connection to goodness or natural order could have served as a vessel for such concentrated malice. The shadow crystals, once created, possessed the ability to generate clouds of artificial twilight that could spread across vast areas with remarkable speed, engulfing entire regions of Hyrule in a false dusk that bore no resemblance to the natural cycles of day and night that had governed the sacred land since its creation. This manufactured twilight was not the gentle transition between light and darkness that occurred during normal sunset, but rather an invasive force that actively worked to transform everything it encountered, according to principles that were fundamentally opposed to the divine design. The invasion of Hyrule began not with armies or open warfare, but with the strategic placement of these shadow crystals at key locations throughout the kingdom, each one serving as a beacon of corruption that spread its influence outward in ever-widening circles of artificial twilight. Zant's intimate knowledge of dimensional magic, gained through his years of existence in the Shadow World, allowed him to position these crystals with devastating effectiveness, targeting areas where their influence would have the greatest impact on the kingdom's ability to resist the spreading corruption. The first regions to fall under the influence of the false twilight were those that lay closest to the dimensional barriers between the worlds, places where the natural boundaries between light and shadow were already somewhat permeable and thus more vulnerable to the kind of artificial manipulation that Xanth's crystals represented. The inhabitants of these areas found themselves caught completely unprepared for the strange transformation that began to overtake their familiar surroundings as the unnatural dusk settled over their homes and communities. The artificial twilight created by the shadow crystals had effects that went far beyond simple changes in illumination, for it carried within itself the same corrupting influence that had transformed the peaceful shadow tribe into savage beasts. Those caught within its influence found their physical forms beginning to change in ways that reflected the spiritual corruption that was seeping into their very essence, their bodies adapting to the false twilight environment in manners that stripped away their connection to the natural order of existence. The most common transformation experienced by ordinary Hylians trapped within the artificial twilight was their reduction to spirit form, their physical bodies becoming translucent and ethereal, as the corrupting influence separated their souls from the material anchor that had kept them grounded in the world of light. These spirits retained their consciousness and memories, but lost their ability to interact with the physical world in any meaningful way, becoming ghostly observers of their own realm's corruption and conquest. This spiritual transformation was not a natural death or transcendence, but rather a form of existence that violated the fundamental principles governing the relationship between soul and body, consciousness and matter. The affected individuals remained trapped between life and death, neither fully alive in the traditional sense, nor properly departed to whatever realm awaited souls after their earthly existence had concluded. Other inhabitants of the affected regions underwent different forms of transformation, their bodies changing into monstrous shapes that reflected the corrupting influence of the artificial twilight, while their minds became twisted by exposure to the concentrated malice that the shadow crystals projected into their environment. These shadow creatures retained enough of their original intelligence to be dangerous opponents, but their personalities and motivations had been so thoroughly corrupted that they no longer resembled the people they had once been. The transformation process was particularly cruel because it often left just enough of the original personality intact for the affected individuals to be aware of what they were becoming while being powerless to resist or reverse the forementioned changes overtaking them. Family members and friends watched in horror as loved ones were corrupted before their eyes, their familiar faces becoming strange and threatening while their voices spoke words of malice and aggression that bore no resemblance to their former gentle nature. The hero of Hyrule, Link, experienced his own unique form of transformation when he first encountered the artificial twilight that was spreading across his homeland. His connection to the Triforce of Courage, providing him with some protection against the corruption, while still forcing him to adapt to the changed environment in which he found himself. The sacred power that flowed through his being manifested as the ability to maintain his essential self while taking on a physical form that could survive within the false twilight, that of a wolf, whose keen senses and natural resilience made him well suited to navigating the transformed landscape. Link's transformation into wolf form represented a middle ground between the complete spiritual dissolution experienced by ordinary Hylians and the monstrous corruption that overtook those whose hearts were more vulnerable to evil influence. His essential nature remained unchanged, protected by the divine fragment he carried within himself, while his physical form adapted to allow him to function effectively in an environment that would have been lethal to his normal human body. The fact that Link retained his consciousness, memories, and moral compass during his transformation demonstrated the protective power of the Triforce fragment he bore. while also illustrating the fundamental difference between natural adaptation to changed circumstances and the corrupting influence that was transforming other inhabitants of the affected regions. His wolf form was not a degradation or loss of his essential self, but rather a manifestation of his inner strength, taking whatever shape was necessary to continue his mission of protecting the innocent and opposing evil. The spreading artificial twilight created an atmosphere of fear and confusion throughout Hyrule as communities found themselves cut off from normal communication and transportation. Their familiar landscapes transformed into alien territories where the usual rules of existence no longer applied. The natural rhythm of day and night that had governed agricultural and social activities for countless generations was replaced by the eternal false dusk that made it impossible to maintain normal patterns of life and work. The psychological impact of the Twilight invasion was perhaps even more devastating than its physical effects, for the inhabitants of Hyrule had grown accustomed to living in a world where the fundamental nature of reality remained stable and predictable. The sudden transformation of their familiar environment into something alien and threatening challenged their basic assumptions about the nature of existence itself, leaving many paralyzed by uncertainty and despair even before the corruption began to work its more direct effects upon their bodies and minds. The light spirits who had maintained their vigil over the sacred land since the time of the ancient banishment found themselves under direct assault from the artificial twilight, their connection to the divine realm weakened by the corrupting influence that actively worked to sever the bonds between the world of light and its spiritual foundations. The shadow crystals seemed specifically designed to target these divine guardians, absorbing and corrupting the sacred energy they channeled while replacing it with the malevolent power that served Xanth's invasion. One by one, the light spirits found themselves overwhelmed by the spreading corruption. Their ability to maintain the spiritual barriers that protected Hyrule from external threats compromised by the sustained assault from the artificial twilight. The dimming of their divine radiance marked the progressive conquest of the sacred land, each extinguished spirit representing another victory for the forces of corruption and another step toward the complete transformation of Hyrule into a realm that would serve Ganondorf's will. The conquest of the light spirits was not accomplished through direct confrontation or overwhelming force, but rather through the gradual erosion of their connection to the divine source of their power, the artificial twilight acting like a spiritual acid that dissolved the bonds between the mortal realm and the heavenly dimension from which the spirits drew their strength. This subtle but relentless assault proved more effective than any military campaign could have been, for it struck at the very foundations of the sacred land's spiritual defenses. As each light spirit fell silent and their protective influence faded from their assigned region, the inhabitants of those areas found themselves completely vulnerable to the transforming effects of the artificial twilight, their last line of defense against corruption removed by Xanth's methodical campaign to isolate and conquer the entire kingdom. The systematic nature of the attack revealed the sophisticated planning and deep understanding of Hyrule's spiritual infrastructure that Ganondorf and his servant possessed, their strategy designed to exploit the very strengths of the sacred land and turn them into vulnerabilities. The false twilight that now covered vast portions of Hyrule bore no resemblance to the natural twilight that occurred during sunset in either the world of light or the true shadow world, for it was specifically designed to serve as an instrument of conquest and transformation, rather than as a natural phenomenon that supported the existing order of creation. Where natural twilight provided a gentle transition between the clarity of day and the mystery of night, the artificial version created by Xanth's crystals imposed its own alien logic upon everything it touched. The very air within the regions affected by the false twilight became thick and oppressive, carrying within its currents the concentrated malice that powered Xanth's invasion, while making it difficult for unprotected beings to breathe without feeling the corrupting influence beginning to work upon their bodies and souls. Every breath drawn within the artificial twilight carried the potential for further transformation, the atmosphere itself becoming a vehicle for spreading the corruption that would eventually reshape all of Hyrule, according to Ganondorf's malevolent vision. The distinction between the true twilight of the Shadow World and the false twilight created by Xanth's shadow crystals represented one of the most important differences that heroes and scholars would need to understand if they hoped to resist and ultimately reverse the invasion that was transforming their homeland. The gentle, contemplative atmosphere of the authentic Shadow World had been designed by divine wisdom to support a different but equally valid form of existence, while the artificial version was nothing more than a weapon designed to destroy and replace rather than to nurture and enhance. This fundamental difference in purpose and origin meant that the false twilight carried within itself the seeds of its own eventual defeat, for it was not a natural phenomenon that could sustain itself indefinitely, but rather an artificial construct that required constant maintenance and renewal from the corrupted power source that had created it. The shadow crystals that generated and maintained the false twilight environment could be destroyed or cleansed, their artificial nature making them vulnerable to the same spiritual forces that had once banished their creator from the sacred land. Yet understanding the nature of the threat was only the first step in developing an effective response to the Twilight invasion, for the corruption had already spread so far and worked such profound changes upon the affected regions that simply removing the shadow crystals would not be sufficient to restore the natural order that had existed before Xanth's assault began. The transformation of the light spirits, the corruption of countless innocent souls, and the fundamental alteration of entire landscapes would require more comprehensive healing than could be accomplished through purely defensive measures. The stage was set for a conflict that would test not only the courage and determination of individual heroes, but the very foundations of the relationship between the worlds of light and shadow. A battle that would ultimately determine whether the artificial corruption imposed by Ganondorf and Xanth could be overcome by the natural order established by divine wisdom, or whether the sacred land itself would be permanently transformed into something alien and hostile to all that had once made it a realm worthy of protection and reverence. One hero would walk between both realms of light and shadow, carrying within his transformed being the unique ability to traverse dimensions that had been sealed against ordinary mortals since the creation of the parallel worlds. Link's journey would take him not only across the corrupted landscape of his homeland, but through the very barriers that separated reality from its reflection, his wolf form serving as both protection against the artificial twilight and passport to realms where human consciousness could not normally venture without being consumed by forces beyond mortal comprehension. The transformation that overtook Link when he first encountered Xanth's corrupted twilight was unlike anything experienced by any other inhabitant of the sacred land, for his connection to the Triforce of Courage provided him with protections that transcended the normal limitations of mortal flesh and spirit. Where others found their essential selves dissolved or corrupted by exposure to the artificial dusk, Link discovered that his divine fragment could adapt and shield him while maintaining the core of his identity intact. His wolf form represented not a degradation or loss of his human nature, but rather a manifestation of the Triforce's protective power, taking whatever shape was necessary to preserve his mission and his essential self in an environment that had been deliberately designed to destroy or corrupt both. The keen senses and natural resilience of his lupine body allowed him to perceive and navigate dangers that would have been invisible or insurmountable to his human form. while his retained consciousness and moral compass ensured that his transformed state served the cause of good rather than evil. The distinction between Link's protective transformation and the corrupting changes experienced by other victims of the artificial Twilight would prove crucial to understanding the fundamental difference between adaptation guided by divine wisdom and corruption imposed by malevolent force. Link's wolf form was a gift that allowed him to function effectively in a hostile environment, while the transformations suffered by ordinary Hylians were violations of their essential nature that separated them from their true selves and from the divine plan that governed their existence. Yet perhaps most remarkably, Link's unique status as one who carried divine protection, while remaining fundamentally mortal, granted him the unprecedented ability to enter the true shadow world without being forced into any transformation whatsoever. When he passed through the mirror of Twilight and set foot in the realm of genuine Twilight that had been created by the goddesses as a place of exile and redemption, his human form remained stable and unchanged, protected by the same divine fragment that had manifested as lupine adaptation in the corrupted environment of Xanth's invasion. This ability to exist in his natural state within the shadow world demonstrated that Link's connection to the sacred realm of Hyrule was so fundamental and complete that even dimensional barriers could not sever it entirely. The Triforce of courage that flowed through his being carried within itself the essence of the sacred land's spiritual foundations, allowing him to serve as a bridge between worlds that had been separated by divine decree, but remained connected through the deeper unity that underlay all creation. The shadow world that Link encountered during his journey was a realm transformed almost beyond recognition by the corrupting influence that Ganondorf had brought to its once peaceful domains. Where the ancient texts and oral traditions spoke of a land of gentle twilight and contemplative harmony, Link found instead a dimension consumed by the same malevolent darkness that had begun to spread across his own homeland, its natural beauty twisted into alien configurations that served the purposes of conquest rather than contemplation. The souls that had once provided nourishing illumination to the peaceful Shadow Tribe lay hidden or sealed away by Xanth's machinations, their gentle radiance replaced by the harsh glare of artificial constructs that projected the same corrupted twilight that was being used to transform Hyrule itself. Without the sustaining light of their traditional sources of spiritual and physical nourishment, the transformed inhabitants of the shadow world existed in a state of constant hunger and aggression that made them dangerous to anyone who entered their domain. It was in this corrupted realm that Link first encountered the being who would become his guide and companion through the most challenging aspects of his quest to restore balance between the worlds of light and shadow. Midna appeared to him initially as a small, impish creature whose mischievous manner and cryptic speech concealed both the depth of her suffering and the magnitude of the responsibility that rested upon her transformed shoulders. The curse that had reduced the rightful ruler of the shadow world to her diminished state was perhaps the cruelest aspect of Ganondorf's conquest of the Twilight realm, for it not only stripped Midna of her physical power and regal appearance, but also limited her ability to communicate the full truth of her situation to those who might have been able to help her. She was forced to speak in riddles and half-truths, her direct access to her own memories and knowledge constrained by the magical bindings that had been wrapped around her consciousness. Yet, even in her cursed state, Midna retained enough of her essential wisdom and authority to recognize Link as someone who possessed the potential to reverse the corruption that had consumed her realm and restore the proper relationship between the worlds of light and shadow. Her decision to serve as his guide through the complexities of interdimensional travel and shadow magic represented both a desperate gamble and an act of faith in the possibility that the ancient balance could still be restored. The partnership that developed between Link and Midna as they worked together to understand and combat the forces that had corrupted both their realms was unlike any alliance that had existed before in the history of either world. Here was a hero of light working in harmony with a princess of shadow, their complementary abilities and perspectives allowing them to perceive and address aspects of the crisis that neither could have handled alone. Link's courage and determination provided the strength necessary to confront the physical manifestations of corruption that blocked their path, while Midna's knowledge of shadow magic and dimensional mechanics offered the wisdom needed to understand and counter the sophisticated magical strategies that Zant and Ganondorf employed in their conquest of both realms. Together, they represented the kind of cooperation between light and shadow that the goddesses had originally intended when they created the parallel worlds. Their first major collaboration involved the cleansing of the artificial twilight that had engulfed vast regions of Hyrule, a process that required not only the destruction of Zant's shadow crystals, but also the restoration of the light spirits whose divine radiance had been corrupted and absorbed by the invasive darkness. This work demanded both Link's ability to survive and fight within the false twilight environment, and Midna's understanding of the magical principles that governed the interaction between different forms of light and shadow. The restoration of each light spirit represented a victory not only over the immediate threat posed by the artificial twilight, but also over the fundamental corruption that sought to sever the connections between the mortal realm and its crude, divine foundations. As the sacred radiance of the light spirits was freed from the constraining influence of the shadow crystals, their purifying power began to work its way through the transformed landscape, slowly but steadily reversing the changes that Zant's invasion had imposed upon the sacred land. The process of cleansing the corrupted twilight revealed important truths about the nature of light and shadow that had been obscured by the artificial conflict that Ganondorf had created between the two realms. Link discovered that the gentle twilight of natural sunset, far from being opposed to the divine light that sustained Hyrule, actually represented a harmonious transition between different but complementary aspects of the same cosmic order. The artificial twilight created by Zant's shadow crystals was fundamentally different from both the pure light of noon and the natural twilight of evening, for it sought to replace rather than complement the existing order of illumination, where natural twilight served as a bridge between day and night, allowing for smooth transitions between different phases of existence. The false twilight imposed its own alien logic upon everything it touched, forcing unnatural transformations that served conquest rather than harmony. Understanding this distinction proved crucial to developing effective strategies for countering the Twilight invasion, for it revealed that the goal was not to eliminate all shadow or twilight from Hyrule, but rather to restore the natural balance between light and shadow that had been disrupted by the artificial constructs imposed upon the sacred land. The cleansing of the shadow crystals allowed the natural rhythms of illumination to reassert themselves, while the restoration of the light spirits ensured that the divine radiance would continue to flow through the realm as the goddesses had originally intended. As Link and Midna worked together to cleanse the corrupted regions of Hyrule, they began to uncover evidence of the deeper connections that linked their two realms. Despite the dimensional barriers that separated them, the shadow crystals that created the artificial twilight drew their power not from the natural forces of either world, but from the concentrated malice that had corrupted the shadow world, revealing that the invasion of Hyrule was both an attack on the sacred land and a symptom of the spiritual disease that had consumed the Twilight realm. The restoration of proper illumination to each cleansed region brought with it the return of the spirits and creatures that had been trapped or transformed by the artificial twilight. Their release from corrupted forms serving as tangible proof that the healing process was working as intended. The joy and relief of families reunited with loved ones who had been trapped in spirit form, the gratitude of communities restored to their natural state, and the visible improvement in the landscape itself, all testified to the effectiveness of the cooperative effort between the hero of light and the princess of shadow. Yet even as they celebrated these victories, Link and Midna understood that their work to restore balance between the realms was far from complete. The cleansing of the artificial twilight from Hyrule addressed only the symptoms of the deeper corruption that had consumed the Shadow World, and lasting peace would require them to confront the source of the malevolence that had made such an invasion possible in the first place. The revelation of the Shadow World's true, peaceful nature came gradually, as Midna began to recover fragments of her suppressed memories, and Link gained greater familiarity with the principles that governed interdimensional travel. The realm that they glimpsed beneath the layers of corruption was nothing like the hellish prison that inhabitants of the light world might have imagined, but rather a place of beauty and wisdom that had been shaped by the same divine love that had created Hyrule itself. This understanding of the Shadow World's intended role as Hyrule's complement, rather than its opposite, changed everything about their approach to the crisis they faced, for it revealed that the ultimate goal was not the destruction of one realm or the other, but the restoration of the proper relationship between parallel dimensions that had been designed to exist in harmony. The corruption of the Shadow World was not only a tragedy for its own inhabitants, but a wound in the cosmic order that affected both realms and would continue to cause problems until it was properly healed. The differences Link experienced in his transformations between the corrupted twilight of Hyrule and the true Shadow World served as a constant reminder of the fundamental distinction between natural and artificial magic, between divine creation and malevolent corruption. His wolf form in the false twilight was a necessary adaptation to a hostile environment, while his unchanged human appearance in the authentic Shadow World reflected the realm's essential compatibility with the order of creation established by the goddesses. These personal experiences of transformation and stability provided Link with unique insights into the nature of the crisis he was working to resolve, insights that complemented Midna's theoretical knowledge of shadow magic and dimensional mechanics. Together, they began to develop a comprehensive understanding of what would be required to restore both realms to their intended state of harmonious cooperation. The cleansing of Hyrule's corrupted twilight represented only the first phase of a healing process that would ultimately need to address the source of corruption in the Shadow World itself, the malevolent presence of Ganondorf, whose very existence in the Twilight Realm violated the divine intentions that had governed its creation. The restoration of proper balance between light and shadow would require not only the removal of artificial obstacles to harmony, but also the active cooperation of leaders from both realms working together toward their common goal. As Link's understanding of his unique role as a bridge between worlds continued to grow, and as Midna's memories of her realm's true nature gradually returned to her despite the constraints of her curse, the stage was set for the next phase of their collaboration. A direct confrontation with the forces that had corrupted the Shadow World, and an attempt to restore the Twilight Realm to its intended role as Hyrule's peaceful and contemplative reflection. As ancient truths were unveiled, the connection became clear between the realms of light and shadow that had been separated by divine wisdom, but remained bound together by forces deeper than dimensional barriers, or the artificial conflicts imposed upon them by those who sought dominion over both worlds. The revelations that emerged during Link and Midna's collaborative efforts to restore balance between their respective domains illuminated not only the immediate crisis they faced, but also the fundamental principles that governed relationship between parallel dimensions created by the same divine hands for complementary purposes. The Shadow World's true role as Hyrule's necessary counterpart became increasingly evident. As the corruption imposed by Ganondorf's presence was gradually understood and countered, revealing beneath the layers of artificial malice a realm that had been designed with the same care and wisdom that had shaped the sacred land itself. The Twilight Realm was not Hyrule's opposite or enemy, but rather its reflection, a dimension where different approaches to existence could be explored while maintaining the same essential commitment to harmony and spiritual growth that characterized the world of light. This understanding transformed everything about the nature of the crisis that Link and Midna were working to resolve, for it revealed that the conflict between their realms was not inevitable or natural, but rather an artificial construction imposed by a corrupting influence that served neither world's true interests. The Shadow World had been created as a place where beings who had chosen different paths could develop according to their own nature, without threatening the delicate balance of forces that sustained both dimensions. The gentle twilight that was the Shadow World's defining characteristic represented not the absence of light, but rather a different quality of illumination, one specifically designed to nurture contemplative wisdom and spiritual insight, rather than the active growth and dynamic change that characterized existence under the direct radiance of the Sunday. The eternal dusk of the Twilight Realm provided the perfect environment for deep reflection and the patient development of understanding that might be difficult to achieve amid the brighter energies and faster rhythms of the world of light. The difference between shadow and darkness became one of the most crucial distinctions that needed to be understood by anyone seeking to comprehend the true nature of the crisis that had befallen both realms. For the corruption that had consumed the Shadow World represented not the natural progression of twilight into night, but rather the imposition of an alien force that sought to eliminate both light and shadow in favor of something that served only the purposes of conquest and domination. True shadow, as it existed in the uncorrupted Shadow World, was created by light and could not exist without it, representing a complementary rather than oppositional relationship between different forms of illumination. The gentle twilight of the Shadow Realm was cast by the radiance of its souls, just as earthly shadows were created by the sun, demonstrating that light and shadow were partners in a cosmic dance, rather than enemies in an eternal war. Darkness, by contrast, was the absence of both light and shadow, a void that sought to consume and eliminate rather than complement and enhance. Ganondorf's malevolence represented this consuming darkness in its purest form, an evil that recognized no distinctions between light and shadow, but sought only to devour both in service of its insatiable hunger for dominion over all existence. The revelation that shadow beings were not evil by nature came as a profound relief to those who had been taught to fear anything associated with twilight or darkness, for it demonstrated that the gentle Shadow Tribe who had dwelt in peaceful contemplation for countless generations were not monsters or demons, but rather people who had adapted to a different environment while maintaining the same fundamental commitment to virtue and wisdom that characterized the inhabitants of any blessed realm. The corruption of the Shadow Tribe into shadow beasts had been an unnatural transformation imposed by Ganondorf's malevolent presence, rather than the inevitable result of exposure to twilight or shadow magic. Just as the artificial twilight that had invaded Hyrule bore no resemblance to the natural cycles of illumination that governed both realms according to divine design, the understanding of this distinction provided hope that the corruption could be reversed and the proper relationship between the worlds restored. Ganondorf's desire to suffocate both the shadow and light worlds in darkness revealed the true scope of his ambitions and the fundamental nature of the evil he represented. for he sought not merely to rule over existing realms, but to transform them into something that served only his own purposes without regard for their original nature or the divine intentions that had shaped their creation. His vision was not of conquest in any traditional sense, but rather of complete annihilation of everything good and beautiful in favor of a reality shaped entirely by his own malevolent will. This ultimate goal of consuming both light and shadow in darkness was entirely consistent with Ganondorf's previous attempts to create dark worlds that served his purposes, as had been witnessed in other dimensions, where his influence had been allowed to spread unchecked. The dark world was not simply a corrupted version of existing reality, but rather an entirely different kind of existence, one where the principles of growth, harmony, and cooperation that characterized divine creation were replaced by stagnation, conflict, and exploitation. The understanding that Ganondorf's evil transcended the simple opposition between light and darkness provided crucial insights into the strategies that would be needed to combat his influence effectively, for it revealed that the solution lay not in choosing one form of illumination over another, but rather in restoring the proper relationship between all forms of light and shadow that served the divine plan for creation. The Shadow World's intended role as a place where different approaches to spiritual development could be explored without threatening the harmony of either realm became increasingly clear as more evidence emerged of the realm's original peaceful nature and the wisdom of its uncorrupted inhabitants. The Twilight Realm had been designed as a sanctuary for contemplation and inner growth, a dimension where the slower rhythms and gentler illumination encouraged forms of understanding that might be difficult to achieve in the more dynamic environment of the world of light. The importance of both light and shadow in maintaining cosmic balance was demonstrated not only by the theoretical understanding that emerged from ancient texts and recovered memories, but also by the practical effects of the corruption that had disrupted the proper relationship between the realms. The artificial conflict between light and shadow that Ganondorf had created had weakened both worlds, making them more vulnerable to the kind of consuming darkness that sought to eliminate all forms of beneficial existence. The restoration of harmony between the realms would require not only the removal of corrupting influences, but also the active cultivation of cooperation and mutual understanding between beings who had been taught to see each other as enemies or threats. The partnership between Link and Midna provided a powerful example of what could be accomplished when heroes from different realms worked together toward common goals, their complementary abilities and perspectives allowing them to achieve victories that neither could have accomplished alone. The true purpose of the Shadow World, as revealed through ancient wisdom and recovered knowledge, was to serve as both complement and balance to the world of light, providing a realm where different but equally valid approaches to existence could flourish without threatening the stability or harmony of either dimension. The Twilight Realm was intended to be a place of peace and contemplation, where wisdom could develop through patient reflection and the gentle influence of eternal dusk. This understanding of the Shadow World's intended role made clear the magnitude of the tragedy that had befallen its inhabitants when Ganondorf's corruption had transformed their peaceful realm into a staging ground for invasion and conquest, turning beings of gentle wisdom into instruments of malevolent purpose, while corrupting the very environment that had nurtured their spiritual development for countless generations. The revelation that the Shadow World was technically a creation of the goddesses, just as much as Hyrule itself had been shaped by divine hands, provided the theological foundation for understanding why cooperation between the realms was not only possible, but necessary for the fulfillment of the divine plan that encompassed both dimensions. The same creative love that had shaped the world of light had also designed the realm of shadow, demonstrating that both were equally precious in the sight of their divine creators. The intimate connection between the worlds that existed at the deepest level of reality meant that the corruption of one realm inevitably affected the other, just as the healing of either dimension would contribute to the restoration of both. The Shadow World and Hyrule were not separate entities that happened to exist in parallel, but rather different aspects of a single cosmic design, each essential to the proper functioning of the whole. Without light, shadow could not exist, and without shadow, light would lose much of its meaning and definition. For the interplay between different forms of illumination was what created the rich variety of environments and experiences that made existence worthwhile. The elimination of either realm would impoverish the cosmic order and reduce the possibilities for growth and understanding that the goddesses had intended when they created the parallel dimensions. The understanding that emerged from these revelations transformed the nature of the quest that Link and Midna were pursuing, for it revealed that their goal was not the defeat of one realm by another, but rather the restoration of proper relationships between dimensions that had been designed to exist in harmony. The healing of both worlds would require not only the removal of corrupting influences, but also the patient work of rebuilding trust and cooperation between peoples who had been turned against each other by forces beyond their control. The Shadow World's role as Hyrule's reflection and complement meant that the wisdom and insights developed in the Twilight realm could contribute to the understanding and spiritual development of inhabitants of the world of light, just as the dynamic energy and creative force of the sacred land could inspire and nourish those who dwelt in eternal dusk. The exchange of knowledge and perspective between the realms would enrich both dimensions in ways that neither could achieve in isolation. The revelation of these ancient truths provided both hope and direction for the enormous task that lay ahead, demonstrating that the corruption which had seemed so overwhelming and permanent was in fact a violation of the natural order that could be corrected through proper understanding and dedicated effort. The Shadow World's true nature as a realm of peace and wisdom offered a vision of what could be restored, while the understanding of its proper relationship to Hyrule provided the framework for achieving that restoration. As Link and Midna prepared for the final phases of their quest to heal both realms and restore the balance between light and shadow that had been disrupted by Ganondorf's malevolent intervention, they carried with them not only the power and determination needed for the battles ahead, but also the wisdom and understanding that would be essential for building a lasting peace between dimensions that had been designed by divine love to exist in perfect harmony. With understanding came the possibility of redemption, as the heroes who had labored so long to comprehend the true nature of the crisis that had befallen both realms finally possessed the knowledge and wisdom necessary to attempt the healing of wounds that had festered for generations. The restoration of harmony between the worlds of light and shadow would require not only the defeat of those who had corrupted the ancient balance, but also the patient work of rebuilding relationships that had been poisoned by artificial conflicts and the lies of those who sought to profit from division and hatred. The defeat of Zant, that self-proclaimed king of shadows whose borrowed power had enabled him to spread corruption across two dimensions, marked the beginning of the restoration process that would eventually free both realms from the malevolent influence that had transformed them into instruments of conquest rather than sanctuaries of peace and contemplation. Yet Zant's downfall, while necessary, was only the first step in a healing process that would need to address not only the immediate symptoms of corruption, but also the deeper spiritual wounds that had made such corruption possible in the first place. The confrontation with Zant took place within the very heart of the Shadow World, in chambers that had once served as halls of peaceful governance, where the legitimate rulers of the Twilight realm had made decisions based on wisdom and compassion rather than on the desire for dominion over other dimensions. The corruption of these sacred spaces into throne rooms for a usurper who had never possessed any legitimate claim to authority represented one of the most profound violations of the Shadow World's essential nature. Link's battle with the False King revealed not only the extent to which Ganondorf's malevolent power could corrupt and transform even those who had once possessed the potential for good, but also the fundamental weakness of evil that drew its strength from borrowed sources rather than from the natural order of creation. Zant's abilities, impressive though they might appear to those who witnessed his displays of magical force, were entirely dependent upon his connection to his master's corrupted essence, making him vulnerable to any attack that could sever or disrupt that flow of malevolent energy. The defeat of Zant stripped away the artificial authority that had enabled him to command the corrupted Shadow Tribe and maintain the systems of oppression that had transformed the peaceful Twilight realm into a staging ground for invasion and conquest. Without the borrowed power that had elevated him above his natural station, the False King was revealed as nothing more than a broken soul whose corruption had isolated him from any genuine connection to the realm he claimed to rule. Yet even as Zant fell, and his immediate influence over the Shadow World began to wane, the deeper corruption that had made his rise possible remained embedded in the very foundations of the Twilight realm. For Ganondorf's presence continued to poison the spiritual atmosphere of a dimension that had been designed to nurture contemplation and wisdom, rather than to serve as a prison for concentrated evil. The removal of Zant from power was a necessary step toward healing, but the restoration of the Shadow World's true nature would require the elimination of the source of corruption itself. The liberation of the Shadow World from Zant's tyrannical rule allowed many of the realm's inhabitants to begin recovering from the transformations that had been imposed upon them by exposure to concentrated malice, their essential nature reasserting itself as the artificial influences that had corrupted them were weakened by the removal of their primary source. The Shadow Beasts, who had once been members of the gentle Shadow Tribe, slowly began to remember who they had been before corruption had stripped away their capacity for peace and contemplation. This process of recovery was neither instantaneous nor uniform, for the depth and duration of each individual's corruption had varied according to their personal circumstances and their natural resistance to malevolent influence. Those who had been transformed most recently found it easier to reclaim their original nature, while those who had lived for years or decades under the influence of corrupted magic faced a longer and more difficult journey back to their true selves. The restoration of individual Shadow Tribe members to their uncorrupted state provided hope and encouragement for the broader healing of their realm, demonstrating that even the most profound spiritual damage could be reversed, given sufficient time, patience, and the removal of the corrupting influences that had caused the original harm. Each soul that was freed from the artificial malice that had consumed their personality represented a victory for the forces of redemption and a step toward the complete restoration of the Shadow World's intended character. Midna's reclamation of her true form and rightful throne represented perhaps the most significant and symbolically powerful aspect of the Shadow World's liberation from corrupted rule, for her transformation back into her authentic appearance marked not only the reversal of the personal curse that had diminished her for so long, but also the restoration of legitimate authority to a realm that had suffered under the tyranny of usurpers and those who served foreign masters. The princess, who emerged from the artificial constraints that had bound her consciousness and limited her abilities, was revealed to be a being of remarkable beauty and wisdom, her true form reflecting the same divine craftsmanship that had shaped the Shadow World itself during its original creation. Her recovery of full access to her memories and powers provided the Twilight Realm with a leader who combined intimate knowledge of her people's needs with the magical abilities necessary to guide the healing process that would restore their dimension to its intended state. Midna's restoration to her throne was accomplished not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through the natural recognition by her subjects that their legitimate ruler had returned to them, her authority flowing not from force or manipulation, but from the genuine love and respect that bound the Shadow Tribe to the royal lineage that had guided them through countless generations of peaceful existence. The joy and relief that greeted her recovery demonstrated the depth of the bonds that connected the Twilight Realm's inhabitants, despite the artificial divisions that corruption had attempted to create among them. The restoration of the souls that had once provided light and spiritual nourishment to the Shadow Tribe represented one of the most crucial aspects of healing the Twilight Realm's damaged environment, for these crystalline sources of gentle illumination were not merely practical necessities, but also spiritual symbols of the realm's connection to the divine order that governed both dimensions. The recovery of their original radiance marked the beginning of the end for the artificial darkness that had consumed the Shadow World during the years of Ganondorf's influence. Each soul that was freed from the corrupting influence that had dimmed or extinguished its light contributed to the gradual transformation of the Shadow World's atmosphere from the oppressive darkness of conquest and exploitation back to the gentle twilight of contemplation and peace. The return of natural illumination to chambers and landscapes that had been shrouded in artificial night brought with it the renewal of hope and the possibility of spiritual growth that had been suppressed during the long years of Send. Corrupted rule. The healing of the corrupted Shadow Tribe proceeded gradually but steadily, as the environmental conditions that had supported their original transformation into peaceful beings were restored through the combined efforts of their recovered princess and the divine power that had never abandoned their realm despite the suffering it had endured. The gentle influence of restored twilight began once again to work its transformative magic upon hearts and minds that had been twisted by exposure to concentrated malice. The process of healing was not simply a matter of removing corrupting influences, but also of actively nurturing the positive qualities that had characterized the Shadow Tribe before their fall, helping individuals and communities to remember and reclaim the virtues of patience, wisdom, and compassion that had made their civilization a worthy complement to the sacred land of Hyrule. The restoration of proper relationships between the inhabitants of the Shadow World required not only the elimination of artificial hatred, but also the cultivation of genuine love and understanding. The re-establishment of the proper relationship between worlds involved not only the healing of the Shadow World's internal corruption, but also the restoration of appropriate boundaries and connections between dimensions that had been violated by Ganondorf's attempt to use the Twilight Realm as a staging ground for the conquest of the sacred land. The Mirror of Twilight, which had served as both gateway and symbol of the relationship between parallel worlds, needed to resume its intended function as a bridge between realms, rather than as a tool for invasion and exploitation. The restoration of proper dimensional relationships required careful attention to the delicate balance that had originally been established by divine wisdom when the parallel worlds were first created, ensuring that the Shadow World could serve its intended role as Hyrule's contemplative complement, without threatening the harmony that both realms needed to flourish according to their respective natures. The connection between the worlds needed to be maintained, while also ensuring that neither realm could be used as a weapon against the other. The Shadow World's return to its intended role as Hyrule's reflection and complement was marked not only by the restoration of its internal peace and harmony, but also by the resumption of its proper function as a place where different approaches to spiritual development could be explored and refined without threatening the stability of either dimension. The Twilight Realm once again became a sanctuary for contemplation and wisdom, a place where the gentler illumination encouraged forms of understanding that complemented rather than competed with the insights developed in the world of light. The healing of relationships between the inhabitants of the two realms required acknowledgement and understanding of the suffering that had been caused by the artificial conflict that had been imposed upon them by corrupting influences, as well as the patient work of rebuilding trust and cooperation between peoples who had been turned against each other by forces beyond their control. The partnership between Link and Midna provided a powerful example of what could be accomplished when heroes from different dimensions worked together toward common goals. The restoration of the Shadow World to its intended state of peaceful contemplation represented not only a victory over the forces of corruption, but also a vindication of the divine wisdom that had originally separated the incompatible approaches to existence into parallel realms, while maintaining the essential unity that connected all creation. The Twilight Realm's recovery demonstrated that even the most profound spiritual damage could be healed when approached with patience, understanding, and genuine commitment to the restoration of divine order. As the Shadow World emerged from its long nightmare of corruption and exploitation, its inhabitants rediscovered the joy and fulfillment that came from living in harmony with their realm's essential nature and their proper relationship to the cosmic order that encompassed both light and shadow. The gentle twilight that had once seemed like a prison or limitation was revealed to be a gift that enabled forms of spiritual growth and understanding that would have been impossible under different conditions. The restoration of harmony between the Shadow World and Hyrule marked the beginning of a new era of cooperation and mutual enrichment between dimensions that had been designed to support and complement each other's development, their different approaches to existence contributing to a richer and more complete understanding of the possibilities that divine creation had made available to conscious beings, willing to explore them with wisdom and compassion. The healing of both realms through the defeat of corruption and the restoration of proper relationships between light and shadow served as a testament to the power of redemption and the possibility of overcoming even the most profound forms of evil through the patient application of wisdom, courage, and love, guided by understanding of the divine principles that governed all existence across every dimension of creation. And so the Twilight found its rightful place once more in the cosmic order that had been established by divine wisdom at the very beginning of creation, the gentle dusk of the Shadow World resuming its intended role as complement and reflection to the blazing light that sustained the sacred land of Hyrule. The restoration of proper balance between the parallel dimensions marked not only the end of a long nightmare of corruption and artificial conflict, but also the beginning of a new era of understanding and cooperation between realms that had been designed to enrich each other through their differences rather than to compete for dominance or survival. The eternal dance between light and shadow that had been disrupted by Ganondorf's malevolent intervention was restored to its natural rhythm, each realm contributing its unique gifts to the cosmic symphony that celebrated the infinite creativity and wisdom of the goddesses who had shaped both dimensions with equal love and care. The harsh extremes of absolute light and consuming darkness that had threatened to destroy the delicate balance upon which both worlds depended were replaced once again by the gentle transitions and harmonious interactions that allowed each realm to flourish according to its essential nature. The Shadow World stood as living proof that exile need not mean damnation, that even those who had fallen from grace through their own choices could find redemption and spiritual growth when provided with environments that encouraged virtue rather than corruption. The transformation of the banished sorcerers into the peaceful Shadow Tribe, and their eventual recovery from the artificial corruption that had been imposed upon them by external malevolence, demonstrated the power of patient love and divine wisdom to heal even the most profound spiritual wounds. The Twilight Realm's journey from its origins as a place of exile for those who had rebelled against the divine plan, through its golden age as a sanctuary of contemplation and wisdom, into its darkest period as a staging ground for invasion and conquest, and finally to its restoration as a complement to the world of light, represented one of the most remarkable stories of redemption and transformation in the entire history of divine intervention in mortal affairs. Midna's final choice regarding the future relationship between her realm and the world of light reflected the wisdom that had been earned through suffering and the understanding that had come from witnessing the consequences of both separation and artificial conflict between the parallel dimensions. Her decision to seal the mirror of Twilight, while difficult and painful for all who had come to value the connections that had been forged between the realms, represented a mature recognition of the need to protect both worlds from future exploitation by those who might seek to use dimensional bridges as tools for conquest rather than cooperation. The sealing of the mirror of Twilight was not an act of rejection or hostility toward the world of light, but rather a protective measure designed to prevent future corruptions of the proper relationship between realms that had suffered so greatly from the artificial conflicts imposed upon them by those who sought dominion over both dimensions. Midna understood that the connection between light and shadow was deeper and more fundamental than any physical gateway, existing at levels of reality that could not be severed by the closing of dimensional passages. The farewell between Midna and Link, between the Princess of Shadows and the Hero of Light, carried within it both the sorrow of separation and the joy of knowing that their collaboration had restored balance to both their worlds, their friendship serving as a bridge between realms that transcended the physical barriers that would now separate their respective dimensions. Their partnership had demonstrated the possibility of harmony between light and shadow, and that example would endure even after the gateway between their worlds was closed. The peaceful twilight hours that occurred naturally in both worlds served as daily reminders of the connection that linked the parallel dimensions despite their physical separation. The gentle transition between day and night in Hyrule echoing the eternal dusk of the shadow world, and demonstrating that light and shadow remained partners in the cosmic dance, even when their respective realms could no longer touch directly. These moments of natural twilight became times of contemplation and remembrance, when inhabitants of both worlds could reflect upon their shared history and their continuing connection despite dimensional barriers. The wisdom that had been gained through the long struggle to understand and restore the proper relationship between light and shadow would be preserved in both realms, passed down through generations as a reminder of the importance of recognizing and respecting the different but equally valid approaches to existence that could flourish when given appropriate environments and protection from those who sought to exploit or corrupt them for selfish purposes. The restoration of harmony between the worlds demonstrated that understanding and compassion were more powerful than force or conquest as tools for resolving conflicts between different approaches to existence, and that the patient work of building genuine relationships and mutual respect could overcome even the most profound artificial divisions created by those who profited from fear and hatred between peoples who shared far more common ground than they realized. The Shadow World's recovery and restoration to its intended role as a realm of contemplation and wisdom provided hope for all who had suffered under systems of oppression and corruption, demonstrating that even the most comprehensive forms of spiritual damage could be healed when approached with sufficient patience, understanding, and commitment to the restoration of divine order and the protection of environments that nurtured virtue rather than vice. The gentle twilight that now reigned once more in its proper realm served as a constant invitation to contemplation and inner growth, its soft illumination creating the perfect conditions for the kind of deep reflection and spiritual development that complemented the more active and dynamic forms of growth that characterized existence in the world of light, each realm contributing its unique gifts to the complete spectrum of possibilities for conscious development and understanding. And so our journey through the ancient mysteries of the Twilight realm comes to its peaceful conclusion, like the gentle settling of dusk over a landscape that has been restored to harmony. After a long period of conflict and confusion, we have witnessed the birth of parallel worlds from divine love, the fall of beings who chose corruption over contentment, and the eventual redemption of realms that had been designed to complement rather than compete with each other in the great work of creation. Rest now in the knowledge that even in the darkest moments of apparent defeat and corruption, the possibility of healing and restoration remains available to those who approach their challenges with wisdom, patience, and genuine commitment to understanding, rather than conquering the forces that shape existence across all dimensions of reality. The twilight continues its eternal dance with light, and both find their meaning in the harmony they create together.